All right. Hey, friends, I've launched a little project here. I'm going to do live stream reading of my book, Outdoing Jesus, the 7 ways to live out the promise of greater than. And I'm going to do this with some interactions with people on Zoom and on Facebook, and I'll deliver it to all of you via podcast. And it'll serve as sort of an audiobook, I guess, if you're interested in the audio version of Outdoing Jesus. I would invite you to go buy your very own copy if you like it. I think, it's worth having around, and would love for you to get yourself a copy on Kindle, digital versions, however you like those, or in print copy, which you can get from your local retailer. So the book is Outdoing Jesus, 7 Ways to Live Out the Promise of Greater Than. I have to record the first chapter here that's not live on the Facebook feed and on Zoom because I forgot to click record on the first chapter. The second chapter, though, that's going to be part of the same podcast that you're going to hear in a little bit, it does have my interactions with some of the people in the live reading version. So, all right, here we go. Chapter 1, Outdoing Jesus, ? Really? ? The centerpiece of Jesus' message. We are all capable of miracles. Even Jesus liked miracles. You, me, all of us can do greater good works in our lives than Jesus did in his. I know that might sound like a sacrilegious or even ridiculous claim, but that's exactly what Jesus intended. And this is really good news. It's happening all over the world, in fact, all the time. The idea that we can do something greater than Jesus did, it isn't my idea. It's not even a new idea. Jesus states it quite clearly in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 12. I assure you, he says, that whoever believes in me will do the works that I do. They will do even greater works than these because I'm going to the Father. Take a moment and let those 2 sentences settle in. If you want to double check that they're actually from the Bible, I wouldn't hold it against you. This teaching comes in the midst of a conversation that Jesus has with his disciples about his impending death. He assures them that the work he is doing will not come to an end. Instead, they will continue and even expand in their lives. I'm going to read that again. Instead, they will continue and even expand in the lives of those who follow in his ways. He encourages his disciples to understand this as a good thing. I find this to be one of the most essential, provocative, and life-giving of all Jesus' teachings. In fact, I believe it's the centerpiece of Jesus' spirituality and message. The works to which Jesus is referring, they're the 7 miraculous signs that make up the structure of the Gospel of John. Maybe like me, you've heard these stories countless times over the years. Maybe they're new to you. Either way, I hope you'll consider this book an invitation to new ways of understanding these epic stories and what Jesus might be calling us to. I read these miraculous signs as Jesus' wonderfully audacious call for humanity to do and even outdo his work, to be an ever-expanding benefit and blessing to all the world. They serve as a living framework, leading us beyond tribal distinctions that pit one group of people against another. They lay out a way of life that implores us to see behind fearful scarcity thinking, that frees us from oppressive systems, that bring an end to the fiction that the most powerful are those with the ability to destroy and to kill. Jesus was a revolutionary, invested in seeing humanity live up to its best, highest, most fulfilled, and God-infused potential. This empowering way of seeing the teaching of Jesus, it has significant impact on the shape of the communities and the religion that form around his life and teaching. If our faith calls us to create settings through which all people are invited to do even greater things than Jesus did, then it removes much of the competition and division between the sacred and the secular, the faithful and the not-so-faithful, the science-minded and the techno-skeptic. We become able to see all acts of goodness, technological advances, medical breakthroughs, and psychological discoveries and treatments as part of the same trajectory of healing, including sharing and resurrecting, that Jesus was authorizing. Jesus is calling us to drop our self-imposed limits and to follow the path he was on, to drink the cup he drank from, to believe in God and to believe in him, to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, to take up our cross and follow him. When we see Jesus as the spark that started a fire warming the hearts of all people to demonstrate goodness, love, and inclusion, we begin to understand the Christian notion of incarnation, not as some miraculous exception, but as the magnificent rule. God in us and through us at all times and all places. We live in a spectacular world at an incredible time. By all measures, things have never been better for people than they are right now. I know that all is not right in the world. I know we're not even close to all the goodness that is necessary and possible. There remain countless ways that people are held back by exclusion, violence, greed, sexism, exploitation, and the racism rooted in white supremacy. It's true that we continue to damage the planet in ways from which it may never recover. And we limit our imaginations on how we organize governments and economies, preventing far too many people from having long, healthy, fulfilled lives. Yes, we are still figuring out how to leave behind harmful and depressing narratives and embrace reconciliation, inclusion, nonviolence, generosity, equality, and sustainability. But it also remains true that there is less starvation, more education, fewer people living in poverty, fewer people enslaved by others, more people working, fewer wars and military conflicts, and more people deciding their own personal and national fates than at any other time in human history. And all of this is happening amid a growing world population. We are on the verge of seeing even greater advances in every area of human life. I can't wait to introduce you to the people who are making incredible strides in science, technology, philanthropy, and structural design. These people are bringing about changes in their fields that promote human flourishing and affect spiritual well-being, the agenda of God that Jesus was calling us to. In this book, you will meet ordinary people who have lived into the greater than promise and are fulfilling the implications of this empowering, provocative, and encouraging message. They're making food available for a world population of more than 7 billion. They're engaging in collaborative work that brings peace to communities in conflict. They're developing new technologies in health and healing. These ordinary people are finding new ways to fund the needs of the under-resourced around the world through entrepreneurship and philanthropy. They're making the earth more livable, acting with life-changing empathy, bringing back life when all hope seems lost, and saving the lives of the most vulnerable. So, has humanity outdone the works of Jesus? I say the answer is yes. And that's just the way Jesus intended it to be. End of chapter. All right, here it is, chapter 2, not better than, greater than, entering the Jesus path. Chapter 2. I was raised in a family that didn't attend church or celebrate the religious elements of Christmas or Easter, which we're in right now. We never read the Bible and we never prayed. My knowledge of Jesus was shaped by pop culture references in movies, songs, and television. Needless to say, it was not a very well-formed knowledge. I didn't know anything about church, religion, or faith, and that was just fine with me. I had no sense that I was missing something. But my entrance into the Jesus path was not compelled by some profound emptiness inside, nor did I sense that I was missing something. As is common in many conversion stories, what captured me was the riveting message of Jesus. It still captures me today. I think of myself and all Christians as called into a life as a follower of God in the way of Jesus. The message of Jesus captures this sense of being on the path, following an active, engaged, meaningful way. I see myself moving along that long, beautiful, gracious path of life that Jesus walked and called people to. I too am invited to tread that path, or as my friend Brian McLaren puts it, to make the road as we travel. It was this invitation to enter a path, a way of life, a way of being, that drew me in as a 16-year-old. I had one of those personally transformative experiences that's common among people going through a spiritual awakening. It happened suddenly over a 2-hour period while I was watching a passion play with a friend. You can see part of the reason I really was thinking about this whole book here is that here at Easter time is so much of what I'm trying to get at in the book is really rooted in Easter story. And my own conversion into Christianity was an Easter period of time. So I was at a passion play just before Easter back in 1983. So back to the reading. It happened suddenly over a 2-hour period while watching a passion play with a friend. What drew me deeply in was the story of Jesus declaring that God was on the side of humanity. To me, this drama captured the reality of life I knew to be true. Just how hard life can be and how common it is to feel harassed by other people and to feel troubled by our own failures, doubts, and fears. The explicit imagery of Jesus on the side of people and Jesus declaring that God was on their side too was so powerful for me. I was and still am enamored by the idea that Jesus taught and modeled solidarity between God and humanity. This idea resonates. Pardon me for 1 second. I forgot to turn off my notifications. I was and still am enamored with the idea that Jesus taught and modeled solidarity between God and humanity. This idea resonated with my deep knowledge that the connection between people and God is the default for all people in all situations, without condition or qualification. Over the last 35 years, it has continued to draw me into a life committed to the path and proclaiming, quote, the greatest story ever told. The story of the partnership between God and humanity as seen in Jesus. We are called to do as Jesus did, to follow along the same path that Jesus followed, for the same reason that Jesus did, to tap into the fullness of our humanity and to share life with God. I had a recent conversation about this with my friend Samir Samalovic. Wait, what's fun about this is that little notification that just popped up a minute ago, it was from Samir. So anyway, Samir is a spiritual teacher and a life coach, and he said, quote, "It took me a while to recognize that I don't need to fear that all of our work is a threat to God. God doesn't have an ego problem. God is not worried about being outdone. To God, there is something more important than God. God is committed to the benefit and blessing of all humanity. In other words, for God so loved the world that he gave." Here's where the long-held understanding of Jesus as the, quote, brother of humanity, the one who is calling us all to live in the fullness of the family of God by doing and outdoing as an outflow of our shared humanity, is so powerful. It is an invitation to life, and one that I accept as I attempt to organize my life and energies to empower the human spirit and to foster life-giving community for a more beautiful, inclusive common good. This is the natural outflow of what it means for me in my time, with my personality, with my passions and interests, to follow God in the way of Jesus as an act of faith. Chapter subheader: Too much pressure? Question mark. The idea that Jesus was inviting all of humanity to live into... We'll start that sentence all over again. The idea that Jesus was inviting all of humanity into a life made of goodness, godness, and to benefit and bless humanity is indeed good news. It's thrilling to know that we are not resigned to seeing Jesus as some far-off and far superior character whose goodness we are forced only to honor but to never perform. And when we hear that we not only will do the things but also are called to do and capable of doing even greater things, our hearts spring to life. I believe that most people want to see the work that we are doing in the world not as lesser goodness than that of our spiritual teacher, guide, and Lord, but as an extension of that which he taught. And we certainly don't want that life of Jesus to be unapproachable or out of reach and thereby irrelevant to the places we work, the businesses we own, the people we love, the art we make, or the goodness that we conspire to bring into reality. We might find ourselves wanting to remake Jesus' statement into something more, say, reasonable, like, I assure you that whoever believes in me will do something significant, but in their own way, and while important to them, it's not really on the scale of what I accomplish. Sure, they will do great works, but only if graded on a curve with the 100 billion other people who have lived since the evolution of humans. They will do good, but not the kinds of things that will rise to the level of a miracle. But here's the thing. Jesus wouldn't make his command to do greater things if it were impossible to accomplish. No, Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. That doesn't mean our efforts to do what Jesus did will always succeed, and it doesn't mean that hard things won't be demanded of us, but this call frees us from our limits. In other words, this is doable, and you are likely doing it already in your own particular way. Chapter subtitle, In the Way of. My friend Luke Hillstead is an exceptional artist. In the coming decades, I expect the art world will hold him in the highest regard as a master painter. Luke studies with, and in many ways emulates, the work of his mentor, the famed Norwegian figurative painter Odd Nerdrum. One of Luke's pieces is hanging in my office. It's a big, bold painting with what people often refer to as a Rembrandt look to it. Almost everyone who comes in my office notices it. Set in a large, handcrafted 4-foot by 4-foot frame that Luke created for it, the painting shows a wounded man being cared for by a nurse of an anonymous battlefield in the indeterminate past. One day, my friend Barry Taylor came into my office and stood taking in the piece for a few minutes while I finished up a phone call. When I hung up, Barry turned to me and said, "Wow, this is a great painting. It reminds me so much of an Odd Nerdrum work. At the time, I only knew of Odd Nerdrum through Luke. I had no idea that other people would know his name or recognize his influence in someone else's work. I asked Barry how he could make the correlation. He said he could see the inspiration of Odd in the style and brushstrokes, in the way the person who understands art can do. He said there was a style to the characters and a certain feel that came through. He could sense the subtle connections to the work of this master painter. Here's the thing. Luke, he didn't set out to copy Odd in his painting style. He is not making Odd Nerdrum replicas. Instead, he's painting as Luke in the way of Odd, as it were. When Barry saw the echoes of Odd in Luke's work, it certainly didn't diminish Odd's work or legacy. Luke isn't trying to make people forget about Odd and pay attention only to Luke. Luke is seeking to be the best painter he can be, and he is inspired by and called forward to do so by Odd's work. As the student, Luke is on the path. I'm going to start that sentence again, pardon me. As the student, Luke is on a path to surpass his teacher while painting in his own way. As peculiar as the idea might be, Luke is the greater Lucian painter in the way of Odd. Luke is painting from his life, eye, heart, and passion, which have in so many ways been influenced by Odd, but also remain specifically Luke's. He's not called to be better than Odd. Luke is called to be greater than Odd by taking the way of Odd to places that only Luke can go. Famously, Odd Nerdrum, He made a point similar to this when describing his experience of seeing a Rembrandt for the first time, the way the Wikipedia story tells it. Nerdrum had seen Rembrandt's painting, The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, in the National Museum of Fine Art in Stockholm. Nerdrum says seeing the painting was a shock, pervasive, like finding home. I can say I found home in this picture. The wonderful thing with Rembrandt is the confidence he inspires, like when you warm your hands on the stove. Without Rembrandt, I would have been so poor. This is one picture of what Outdoing Jesus is all about. We take the life of God in us and find its through line from the life of Jesus to the places of our work, our streets, our families, our hearts, our culture. This is the greater work that we can do. Compared to the limited scope of what Jesus did, our work is of greater impact, greater benefit, and even greater meaning, which only makes sense. Look, Jesus intended his miraculous signs to have greater implication than the benefit of one person in one place. There is almost no ongoing benefit to the miracles that Jesus performed, the food that he made available, the suffering he alleviated, the isolation he bridged. If the same does not happen in more and greater ways today and every day, all the stories of Jesus would be just stories if we are not doing and outdoing them now. Moving beyond the superhero subtitle. See, we like our heroes. And we like to keep our heroes heroes. We build shrines to them. We honor them for their particular talents. In sports, we have halls of fame. In art, we have specialized museums. In music, we give awards. Those who make incredible academic, cultural, and scientific advances are awarded internationally recognized prizes. In religion, we even have the category of saint. And we don't like it when our heroes are outdone. It's a bittersweet experience to see a hero's record broken or his or her career fade. We don't like our heroes to be ordinary or fallible. We want there to be special people in the world. We want there to be special people in the world. Maybe we take comfort in believing that some people aren't affected the way the rest of us are. Whether it's the concept of the Superman in the early 20th century or the gods of Olympus in ancient Greece, we long for someone to rise above the rest of us. For many of us, the first notion we get of people having special abilities, it's attached to our very own parents. I remember sitting in the front seat of the station wagon when I was about 6 years old and asking my dad, "How do you know where we're going all the time?" As a young boy, I had no real concept of the world outside of my block. I could ride my bike with my older sister to the park, and I knew to take a left at the big rock that marked the three-way intersection, but that was pretty much the extent of my navigation skills. But my dad, he could drive for what seemed like hours and always know where he was. He could even drive on highways and make all the correct turns to get us right to the Dairy Queen. These seemed like superhero abilities in my mind. But as we grow through childhood and into adolescence, many of us, we flip that scenario of parental hero worship. Leaving behind our childhood versions, we seem to make this shift, and suddenly we can see And suddenly all we can see is how utterly unprepared our parents seem to be. Their human frailty and weakness are in stark relief to the power they seem to have when we were young. As we reach adulthood, maturity allows us the privilege of freeing our fathers and mothers from the bondage of our childhood idolization and the disillusionment of our adolescence. We begin to learn from them and see them as imperfect masters who walked the path of adulthood before we did. This is much the same process many of us go through in our understanding of Jesus. We need to free our imaginations of the childhood superhero expectations and move into a deeper understanding of Jesus as our master teacher who calls us to a path of life and faith. I think Bruce Springsteen, of all people, taps into this sentiment when he writes about Jesus in his autobiography, Born to Run. Quote, as funny as it sounds, I have a, quote, personal relationship with Jesus. He remains one of my fathers, though as with my own father, I no longer believe in his godly power. I believe deeply in his love, his ability to save, but not to damn. Enough of that. The way I see it, we ate the apple, and Adam, Eve, the rebel Jesus in all his glory, and Satan, they're all part of God's plan to make men and women out of us, to give us the precious gifts of earth, dirt, sweat, blood, sex, sin, goodness, freedom, captivity, love, fear, and death, our humanity, and a world of our own. Close quote. There's no doubt that the Gospels and the community of Christian faith that is carried on for more than 2 millennia proclaim that there is something special about Jesus. Our faith is grounded in the nature of his specialness. But is it something unmatchable by the rest of us? Or was Jesus showing us what humanity can be? All right, that's chapter 2. That one reads a little longer, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it for the night. So, hey, I really appreciate all of you being on. I'm going to be back on tomorrow. It'll be Easter Sunday, and we will read chapters 3 and 4. This book is available on Kindle, so if you want to start reading it yourself tonight, you're welcome to, or you can pick it up at a local retailer, if you can still find one of those that are open, or just find some bookstore that'll send it to you. And I super appreciate you giving this a try and following along. And thanks to all of you on Facebook. And Rustin Comer, thank you for the nice comment on Facebook. Hello, Carol, and others. So if you are around tomorrow afternoon at some point, I think I will, pop this all up again. I'm sorry I don't have enough of a schedule for tomorrow yet with our family activities. You know, the 4 of us living here in our house on what we're going to be doing tomorrow. But we're trying to leave the day a bit open. But at some point tomorrow, we'll be on for chapters 3 and 4. And thanks so much, all. See you then.